afternoon. My name is Jim Worthen. You may remember me. This is Worthen One. This is a show that I'd planned for April with Andy Caldwell for Congress. I had 5 shows planned then, and then the epidemic hit. And we closed down because the National Association of, what are they called? What's it called, Pete?
Public broadcasters.
Yeah, broadcasters nationwide closed down. I wondered because KCOI, KEYT, the news press, news hawks, all were still going, and we couldn't. And I thought, well, we have 58 minutes, not 3 minutes on the evening news. But I found out it wasn't our choice. They had to go along with the association. Andy, we're here today in the last week of the campaign. And, these come down to, as Brian Campbell said the other day to me, our candidate for school board, I said, I've got ads running that I've paid for in the news press through donations with our endorsements. And I said, maybe somebody have said the news press has mainly got all your people already. And I said, but particularly in the nonpartisan races, if we persuade 20 or 30 voters, even though they're maybe very conservative, but they don't know who to vote for, I think it's important. He said, a lot of these races are won by less than 30 votes when you get down to sanitation districts and water districts.
A lot of people leave them blank because they don't know who to vote for.
Yeah, well,
so I like Brian Campbell and Elrod McLearn and Celeste Barber, Carolina Bate.
Yeah, great.
Those are some of the people running down here that I personally know. Good people.
Yeah, they are, and they would be. The latest ad I'm running, I think you'll like. It says nonpartisan endorsements, and it says our students are 50% behind grade level. And then it says, these candidates will protect your children from sex training and being against your values. And then give the list of the school board candidates that we've endorsed. And many of them you've met and agree with. And some of them are not Republicans.
Right. Celeste Barber's not a Republican.
No,
in fact, I used to bash heads with her. She used to be known by another name before her previous husband passed away, and she was in Lompoc, and we used to get into some big fights back then. But, this brings up a point as to why I'm running. I was a Democrat into my 30s, and I felt like the Democratic Party was just leaving me behind left and right. But, with Celeste Barber should be famous throughout this community, because she was the one that stood up to the bullies, the hecklers, the cursors.
Santa Barbara City College Board.
To reinstate the Pledge of Allegiance. She stood up there, took her public comment time, and got, like I said, just viciously attacked for simply saying the Pledge of Allegiance. So here she is, a hardcore Democrat, but her father was a World War II vet. My father was a World War II vet. And that's something we have in common. John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King, they didn't hate America. But we've got this group of people now that literally hate this country. And that's one of the reasons the school board is so important. The other day I got to speak with the school board members who were having a community meeting. And I mentioned, I'm running for a 2-year term. They're running for the next generation.
That's right. I saw that comment. Your articulation of family values, community values, traditional American values is so articulate. It's just
I was born into it. My dad was a Bataan Death March survivor, and my mom was an immigrant from Austria. She was a World War II bride. English is a second language. So I got the immigrant part down, and I got the die for your country part down. My dad ended up losing his life as a result of that trauma. Now, he didn't have any manifested trauma that I knew of, but most all of them died before age 50, which
Yeah.
is what happened to him, because it just took everything out of him.
I'll tell you a tearful story of a 5-year-old boy on Market Street in San Francisco. Me. My mom took me down to Market Street to see the 170 ambulances of men from the, I may have seen your father, from the Bataan Death March coming into San Francisco and going to Letterman Hospital and other hospitals in the Bay Area. And that, as I say, just I'm bringing me to tears
You
now.
are. Well, you know, what they did is they took a very, very slow hospital ship back from Japan because they didn't want the American people to see them.
Oh,
They tried to doctor them up and fatten them up. Most of them were down to about 100 pounds. What people don't understand is we've all heard, although now in schools they're even questioning this, the Nazi death camps. This was the equivalent of Japan's death camps.
Oh, the
It was brutal.
The Japanese were in some ways more brutal than, except for against the Gypsies and the Jews,
Right.
and the mentally disabled
And gays and
yeah.
lesbians. They
Yeah.
were just, they were brutal.
And one of my, I'm a minor theologian, and my great hero was Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
Yes.
A Lutheran minister who refused to renounce his faith. And,
Pastor, martyr, spy.
yeah, and he was executed by Hitler. So Hitler got around to executing a lot of people, but the Japanese were just brutal to everyone. Chinese, Koreans, what they did to the women.
The Filipinos, of course, my dad, that was in the Philippines. They treated the Filipinos, a lot of them were just slaughtered on sight. It was horrific times, but the bottom line is that, as I was mentioning Celeste Barber, she's an old-style Democrat, you know, where she still loves her country. She's liberal or progressive on some things, but she loves our country. AOC and the squad, they do not love America.
No.
And when Joe Biden at the last presidential debate said, "I am the Democratic Party," that was a lie. AOC is today's Democratic Party. Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, those guys are on their way out because they are too conservative. I always tell people about the 2016 election that Bernie Sanders got 90% of the vote at UCSB and Hillary got 10%. Hillary was too conservative for those students. AOC is the future of their party, and she's an avowed socialist.
Yeah, well, I have an opinion that I've heard other pundits mention, although I was first, of course, as you know, and that is that this red wave, this election, is going to be the end of the Democratic Party as we know it.
Either that, or if it's a blue wave, it's the end of America.
Yeah.
And I'd like to explain this to your audience. Right now, in the press, are two attempts by the legislative branch, i.e. Pelosi and Schumer, to take over the White House and to take over the Supreme Court. America, our American founding fathers were geniuses in understanding that mankind's attempt to accumulate powers or put them all in the hands of one person, such as Gavin Newsom, is the worst thing that could happen to the concept of liberty and freedom. So they balanced and separated powers, and then they even separated the powers within the powers. So what Nancy Pelosi wants to take over the presidency by this 25th Amendment Commission, that she could either try to take out Trump if he's reelected or take out Biden if he wins.
Right.
So that's what she's setting that up for. And then Chuck Schumer wants to pack the Supreme Court. Now, see, the Supreme Court, I had Phyllis Schlafly on the show a number of times over the years.
Wonderful woman.
Wonderful woman. And one of the last books she wrote was about the Constitution and all this stuff. And she told me, she goes, "Andy, the judicial branch, especially the Supreme Court, they're supposed to be umpires. They're not supposed to be in the game. They call balls and strikes. Is it constitutional or not constitutional?" Well, see, Chuck Schumer wants to pick jurists that will basically follow the same progressive ideology that he subscribes to. Chuck wants to chuck the Constitution.
Well, the idea of packing the Supreme Court negates the fact that if he adds,
four or more.
Yeah. When the Republicans take power, they have to add 3 or 4.
Right, it'll never end.
It'll ruin the Supreme Court.
Right.
The only reason the Supreme Court went to 9 instead of 6 was there was no appellate courts. So they were actually, the 6 guys were actually having to hear cases.
Wow.
And so they said, wait a second. And they did 2 things in '69 and after the Civil War. They added an appellate level, and they sit in calling the balls and strikes on the Constitution and the letter of the law. And that's what all the judges that President Trump has appointed, and all the judges of the Supreme Court have pledged to be textualists, which means you read the law and you do what it says.
Right.
And you read the Constitution and make sure that anything going on doesn't run contrary to the Constitution.
Well, and the other thing, people want to call it the living Constitution. Well, it is alive. But the way you change it, if society changes its values and morals and whatever else over time, it has a mechanism by which you amend the Constitution, i.e. we're just talking about the 25th Amendment. It's been amended numerous times, and that's how you change it. I'd like to switch gears. There's something that people don't know, and I'd love for your audience to understand this. There's 2 series of ads that we've been running in various mediums. One of them is that Salud likes to claim he's bipartisan. He talks about, I'm on this bipartisan commission and I'm a member of this bipartisan caucus. But he votes 100% of the time.
I was going to say, it doesn't affect his vote.
He votes 100% of the time with Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi's never even been accused of being bipartisan, let alone claimed to be bipartisan. And then secondly, and here's the rest of the story, he's 0 for 48 on original pieces of legislation being signed into law. So bottom line is Nancy Pelosi's district's getting 2 votes. We're getting 0. We're getting 0. We're not being represented.
No.
He's back there filling a seat. And, you know, I'll tell you, I like Salud. I spent every Tuesday with him for over a decade. And he was very affable kind of guy. But I don't recognize him anymore. I've now had 2 encounters with him. One was called an interview. One was called a debate.
We're going to get into that.
So it's all platitudes.
Yeah.
He's all platitudes now.
Our friend Mike Stoker liked him. I know you liked him. I never trusted him because of where he came from. He was an aide to a woman who had been active in the anti-war movement and the violent end of the anti-war.
We believe she was part of the Weathermen, but she had her record sealed, unlike John Butney.
Yeah, and so I just, really never trusted him when he was an aide, and when he became a supervisor, he did play to that constituency, the wealthy Montecito people.
He raised $400,000 in one day in Montecito because there was no limits. And now he's gone back to Washington. I like to say that the Salud I knew stepped off the plane into the swamp. They showered him with cash, and he didn't notice what was going on. He's received up to $1.2 million from super large corporations, union bosses, and lobbyists. $1.2 million. And
from really outside our area.
Right. He's gotten very few donations from here in the district. I, on the other hand, 99% of my contributions are in district, and they're almost all small donations.
Has he outraised you 2 to 1, you think?
Yeah, he's raised a couple million, but he had some left over. It's hard to guess exactly how much he raised and how much he spent this cycle, but he was always asking for more money, not because he needed more money, but because he needed small donors, or else it would have been all outside money. And you have to ask again, who is he representing? And I believe he's representing Nancy Pelosi, not the district.
Now, you took over my show, which I love. Believe it or not, folks, it's not all about me. Don't believe it. Anyway, I want to briefly remind the audience who Andy Caldwell is.
All right.
You mentioned your parents.
So my dad died when I was 9. He went after a career military service. He went back to farming, and we farmed in the San Joaquin Valley in a little town called Kingsburg, California. And he passed away, and my mom and I and my sister moved to Lompoc. My sister ended up going back to Kingsburg to finish high school. So it was pretty much me and my mom in Lompoc. I went to UC San Diego, graduated.
Well, you went to public schools in
public
Lompoc.
schools in Lompoc.
Yeah.
And then I went to UC San Diego. I was going to be a lawyer. I decided not to go. So I had a social science social science degree and no job prospects. So I got a job doing straight manual labor in a factory, working straight graveyard shift, seasonal. I was hired for a seasonal labor
Pretty
position.
close to minimum wage.
It was pretty good, but for a factory, this was one of the epiphanies. After I got that job in that factory, I started working my way up, and I ended up working my way up to industrial relations manager of Union Sugar, a company had been in Santa Maria 90 years. I realized, you know what, I was lied to when I was growing up in 2 ways. One, if you go to college, you can get a good paying job. Well, I found out that depends on what you majored in, okay? But the other thing, the non-event, or what wasn't being said, is if you don't go to college, you're not going to get a good paying job. Yeah. But what I found out in that factory, we had guys, this was in the 80s. We had guys in that factory making $50,000 a year with a high school education. And then I found out the guys in the oil companies were making $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 a year with a high school education. Then somebody that became, I had a friend that had his own roofing business. Somebody else became a plumber. They were all making blue-collar, middle-income wages on high school education. I realized...
In the 80s.
In the 80s.
You know the old canard, what is old is new again. We're there again. Kids are coming out of college being promised that they're going to make a lot of money, and there's no jobs for them, and kids like my son are going into a trade in air conditioning where he knows in 5 to 10 years he'll be making $150,000.
Right. And so I realized this, and so it gave me a burden that our public education system should not try to shoehorn, like they said, everybody should go to college. Everybody needs the opportunity to go to college. Well, I had one of my friends was, you know, it took him a while to turn around. He became a dentist. But a lot of the other guys that were blue collar were just as successful as anybody I've known that went to college. And we need to let people pursue their aptitudes and their interests and provide for them. And this is one of the reasons I'm for school choice. But the other thing, right now in the middle of the COVID shutdown, virtually all the private schools opened weeks ago. So the wealthy who can afford to send their kids to private school, their kids are back being socialized, educated, and everything's good. But the poor people, they're out of luck. There's kids in some communities. I was up in Shandon, which is the northern part, probably the northern eastern part of my district. Kids in that town don't have Wi-Fi. They literally go sit outside the school so they can do their homework or their online lesson while the school's closed.
Well, and there's a lot of minority kids who don't have laptops. They don't have Wi-Fi.
Right.
And they're losing a year.
So, well, now it's going to be 2 years. They lost the end of last year. Now they're losing this one. LA Unified School District back in March lost track of 60,000 students. They just disappeared.
You know, I rail against, and you have dealt better with unions than I could, although I was a union member. Jimmy Hoffa, Teamster at one time for a year. And I like Jimmy. He fought for us. And but the teachers, the public unions are not like the trade unions. The trade unions are really except for their bureaucracy for the working man.
Right.
And the public unions are strictly for the person.
For the teachers. They're for the teachers, not the children. Now, individual teachers, we're not talking about individual teachers. We're talking about the union. So, for instance, LA Union School District, the teacher association there, said we're not going to reopen post-COVID unless you get rid of charter schools.
Yeah.
It's not about the kids. In that case, it's about the competition.
Yeah, and even locally, the teachers union are saying, we're not going to go back, and some of them are making crazy requests like statements on climate change.
And they want Prop 15 to pass and everything else. And again,
it's the union leadership, not the teachers.
Not the teachers.
And the teachers are starting to rebel more and more.
They need to. These kids, I've done a lot of, some of your audience may not know I have a radio show, so I've interviewed upwards of 12,000 people on that show. And I interview a lot of people that are right on the subject of academia, and then plus doctors and psychiatrists and the like. This is killing these kids. They need socialization. They are getting subject to depression. They're losing interest in school. They need the socialization. They need the presence of an adult to help them focus their attention and all the rest. And it's a tragedy what's happening to these kids. Plus, like you said, they only got one chance to go through 4th grade or 8th grade or 10th grade. They got one chance, and we're blowing it for them. And that age cohort, I've done, I think, almost 200 shows on COVID. That age cohort, K through 12, is the least likely to get sick from COVID. Yeah. I mean, by orders of magnitude.
No, more children died last year of the flu than have died.
Right.
In fact, one of the, I just saw a report that kind of made me laugh because I predicted it, and that is that we are killing the flu more than COVID. And I think the first week of the flu announced by the CDC had 1,200 cases rather than 20,000 that they would have had. Now, those aren't deaths, that's flu cases.
Right.
And gee, maybe it's because we're washing our hands, not touching our face. It's not masks. Masks are if we listen to what we were taught in the very beginning of this, wash your hands, don't touch your face, and, masks weren't even part of the early on.
And they shouldn't be, not unless it's an N95 mask.
And in our county, and I think you've perceived this, and I brought it to Lavinetto's attention through Corey Bazzanini, that I watch the reports every day in the paper, every night on TV, and I said to Corey, I'll bet that 40% of the deaths have been in convalescent hospitals, that kind of place. Another 40% have been tragically in the extended families in Santa Maria. You take those out, we have 400,000 people that have less than 20% of the deaths. And they're very unusual.
Right. In the convalescent homes, I've actually had the head of the associations of nursing homes, extended care homes, etc., on my show a couple of times. And the problem there is nursing homes, and I hate to say this because you and I are, neither one of us are spring chickens, okay? Nursing homes.
I raised chickens, and spring chickens got butchered for fryers. Go ahead.
So, nursing homes in America are where people go to die.
Yeah.
And by definition, they're usually within a year or less of the passing. Their immune systems are severely compromised. They're weak. Most of them are immobile. There's all sorts of things going on there. I had a ministry, and my daughter had a ministry, visiting people in convalescent homes. And then when I was little, the reason I had this feelings for them was when my mom, when I was real little, she worked. She was, again, English as a second language, You know, she ended up getting a good job by the time we lived in Lompoc, but she was doing menial labor jobs. Like, she was the aide in a convalescent home, not a nurse, just an aide. And I used to go there with her when I was little. It just broke my heart. So I always swore she ain't going, she's not going to one of those,
right.
you know. And anyway, but the point here is they're not used to taking care of contagious people. That's not what they're there for. They're there to make people comfortable, take care of them, like washing them and feeding them and everything else. But they're not, it's not a hospital. But what did Gavin Newsom do? What did Cuomo do? When the hospitals didn't have room or there was nothing more they could do for these people, they shipped them to the nursing homes. It was gasoline on fire.
I've been criticized for a term I've used for Cuomo and Newsom and the guy in New Jersey, and I call it elder genocide.
It totally was.
Yeah.
And then plus they didn't have the PPE. Their staff, like my mom wasn't a nurse. She would go to bathe them, change them, feed them. She's not a nurse. They didn't have the nurse-to-patient ratios that hospitals do. And again, our government did everything wrong. I'm not a COVID denier. I'm 62 years old with asthma. I would die. I almost died from asthma and the flu when I was a kid. So I'm not a COVID denier, but I am a critic that they did everything wrong. And these nursing homes didn't have the staff, they didn't have the training, and secondly, they didn't have the space. So for instance, in Santa Maria, and I'm sure cottage hospital is even the same, Santa Maria Dignity Health, every single hospital room, single person occupancy, right?
Right.
There is no single person occupancy in these nursing homes unless it's super highfalutin ones. So they're jammed in there with techs trying to take care of contagious diseases.
Yeah, I was elected a deacon in my church, Presbyterian church, and they would give me a name of somebody if I could go find them in their own home to visit them and, you know, take flowers and stuff. And I said to my family, my brilliant son, I said, gosh, I don't feel like I'm doing. He said, Dad, you know, Edith, Bob Burton, Ed Beltran, these are older people at the end of their life that I knew. He said, you go visit them every Sunday. You're being a deacon in your own life.
That's right.
And he said, that's what you do, and you finish church and you go visit Ed, you go visit Burton. And what I saw in some of these rest homes, some good ones, is that they were, when the flu season had hit pretty hard, they all of a sudden had you doing your hands before you went in. No masks, and the staff didn't have masks, and they weren't cleaning to any great extent more than they were. And I said to, again, my contacts in the supervisorial office, I said, why, when this hit, didn't we treat every nurse, we know where it is, why didn't we treat every nursing home like an emergency room?
So let me tell you this.
Let me finish.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Put a health professional in charge of that nursing home and have 24-hour of our own nursing staff in there helping the good people working there. And you know, that would have been one of the answers.
I filed last summer, probably right around June or July, I filed a grand jury complaint against the county public health department because at a hearing in May, we knew the first onshore COVID bomb blew up in a Washington State nursing home.
Kent, Oregon. Kent, Washington.
So we knew
28 people.
It would spread like fire, compromised immune. That's the #1 target for COVID, okay? Yeah. So we knew this. So in March, we had the shutdown order. Early May, the county said, we've got the nursing homes covered. And I thought, well, that's good. Then a month or two later, they said, oh, by the end of this month, we'll have our plans in place for the nursing homes. Well, in the meantime, Santa Maria had one of the first major outbreaks, and then just recently they had another outbreak in another place. So I filed a grand jury report and said, look, or complaint, this is ineptitude that's causing death.
Yeah.
The prison, the Lompoc prison, got more attention than our nursing homes. And most of those prisoners, not all, there were some fatalities, but most of those prisoners
Just
were
2.
asymptomatic. Well, 2 out, but it was a huge prison. There's
Right.
like 2 or 3 prisons in that complex.
Right.
And so, there was, I believe there was at least 1,000 prisoners out there, if not more. But in these nursing homes, the county was totally slow and inept, and I believe criminally negligent.
Well, the criminals were the government and the bureaucrats.
Yes.
The health bureaucrats who aren't doctors. They got their PhD in administration.
And God knows what.
Yeah. Proof in point, just recently, of what you're saying. There's been a spike in Isla Vista. I mean, I have an elderly friend who owns property there and goes out there every day, and I keep him posted. And I said, last report it was 7. Yesterday it was 14. That was this week. Guess where they are? Fraternity and sorority houses.
Right.
Again, where
High density living conditions.
Yeah. And again, I'm not sure it's mass. I'm sure they're not going through and spraying the countertops and everything.
So this was one of my original criticisms. Most people at work have their own desk, cubicle, or office. It's easy to social distance at work.
Yeah.
It's easy to wipe things down at work. Who wears a mask? Who wipes down things or socially distances at home? It doesn't happen. I made the argument that people would be safer going to work than they are hanging out at home. And then we're talking about safety. Domestic violence went through the roof. Suicide, alcohol, drug abuse, all of these
child
abuse, all these things went
domestic
through
violence.
Everything went through the roof. And then plus the kids, like I said, the kids got locked up with Mr. Predator or Mr. Violent.
Yeah, it's, I think when the history books are written about this, the cause of death from COVID will be second to the cause of death from
all these
lockdowns.
Other things.
Yeah.
And that's what even the World Health Organization
Finally
came out with a report finally admitting that. And then there was this thing called the Barrington Declaration. And Oxford, Harvard, and Stanford professors, 3 of them wrote this declaration within a week.
And got 300 people to sign it within.
And then another 15,000 within a week signed
Wow.
it. 15,000 saying
I didn't
the
hear
lockdown,
that.
we're not doing this right. I called it Keystone Cops. Great amount of energy, no accomplishments.
Well, that's the difference between liberals and conservatives. Liberals base what they're doing on how they feel about it. Conservatives look for facts.
That's right, results.
Yeah, and base that doesn't mean we don't have feelings.
Right.
I mean, I feel for every friend and everyone I know. A guy you probably met back in the day, Bud Iman, Santa Barbara City Councilman about 35 years ago, died in a rest home. Now, he had a stroke 5 years ago. He had Parkinson's, and his wife, who they'd been separated but they love each other, and she'd been helping and taking care of him. She was 25 years younger than he, is mad as heck that he was declared a COVID death.
Right.
Because she wanted another COVID test because he did this positive, they said. She wanted to know tests on his strokes, and she was furious at the misdiagnosis.
Right. So what they did, if you died with COVID, they marked you down as having died from COVID.
Yeah,
and then plus they count somebody that tests positives but has no symptoms whatsoever
and dies in a motorcycle accident.
Right. but as far as the cases, the number of cases, it has to do with positive tests, even though there's no symptoms. They should have separated out asymptomatic from mild cases, from hospital cases, ICUs, and death. They should have separated those out. And see, like right now, Santa Barbara County, our hospitalization rate and death rate right now is lower than it's been since April 1st, which means it's as low as it's been since the outbreak.
Oh, San Luis County
is even lower.
They report nobody in the hospital, and
right,
nobody.
It's even lower.
And the interesting thing when Cottage System reports, and I know because I've talked to people with the Marion, the what's it called now, Marion
Dignity.
Medical, Dignity Medical. What they do is they give a report. There's 250 cases in Cottage Hospital of people being treated, and yet they have only 10 on ventilators they report, and they have 80 available, and that's very consistent that we've got plenty of ventilators, and they only have 6 cases of COVID in the hospital.
Right.
But people see that 250 number, they don't realize we're finally treating people with heart disease, cancer. For the very beginning of this in March and April, the hospitals were empty.
Right, because they cancel everybody's appointments and surgeries.
Yeah.
So I'd like to get back to Congress if we can.
Yes.
I want to solve.
Why are you running for Congress?
I want to solve problems. I challenge people. In this district. Name one thing Salute Carbajal has done. One change he's made while he's been back in Washington, D.C. Name something. Now, I know the 0 for 48 record isn't speaking to a lot of accomplishments. He'll talk about his activity, but activity is not accomplishment. But what difference has he made?
Well, he's been a congressman for 2 years. And
4 years. He's going into his...
I'm so sorry.
Yes.
We have 10% of our energy in this state comes from a clean source that is
greenhouse gas free.
Yeah, and not had a problem in 40 years, called Diablo Canyon. What has he done to stop them from closing it?
Nothing. So I'll give you 2 examples. I want to prevent fires by forest management.
Right.
He wants to fund firefighting after the fact. I want to keep Diablo open. He wants to come up with some scheme to try to get people other jobs. There are no other jobs on the Central Coast that pay what Diablo pays. It pays higher than the oil industry. Those guys are making $100,000 a year out there or more. Listen to this. The payroll for Diablo is $225 million a year. Its overall economic impact is $1 billion a year. And like you said, 10% of the state's electricity. We're having rolling blackouts right now. Newsom wants us to go all electric. Where's the electricity going to come from? You can't get there from here without Diablo.
Well, they're going to buy from the Navajos in New Mexico.
Yeah, not going to happen.
The power.
Not going to happen.
In their coal-burning power plants.
Well, that might happen. Coal, we bring in, and this is where California, it's a virtue signaling, green virtue signaling. We bring in more oil and gas into California from foreign countries than any other state. And we have to import more electricity than any other state. So when they say we're the leader, we're not the leader. We're actually in last place.
Yeah,
we just virtue signal. We're number 1 virtue signalers.
Well, and I think I heard you say that in the United States, as far as clean energy, we're like 39th or something.
Yeah, we're not doing good at all. And what happened is California used to get almost all its oil and gas from 2 places, California and Alaska. We got almost all of our energy from California and Alaska. Well, Alaska's dwindled. We replaced, and ours has dwindled, we replaced all that with foreign oil.
So, yeah, and it's not clean.
No, it's not.
Fuel and not clean oil barrels. In talking about what you can do in Congress, you're not going to, we know that Salud has 1 metric in Congress, vote with Nancy Pelosi.
Yes.
Nothing else. You can't find anything else he's done except a little, as you say, virtue signaling and he talks nice about being a veteran, but he doesn't give the president and the Veterans Administration any credit for completely changing
That's
the
right.
way
Trump's
veterans.
done great stuff.
Yeah, a veteran today, if you're a veteran and you're sick and you can't get an appointment, I think it's within 48 hours, a set appointment to go to a veterans clinic or hospital, you can go to your own doctor.
That's right, and the way it should be. Now, my sister, let me tell you, you asked why I'm running for Congress. You've known me. We've known each other for probably 30 years. I've never had an ambition to run for office.
I know.
But I have had...
People have tried to talk to you into it before.
They've tried it for a long time. But I have had a desire to serve my country. My dad was a career veteran. The good job my mom eventually got, she worked at the Veterans Service Office in Lompoc. And my sister was a nurse at the Veterans Hospital in Los Angeles.
I didn't know that.
So all three of them served veterans. My dad was a veteran. The other two served him. And that's how I'm looking at this. I'm looking at it as my country needs people to step up, and that's why I'm doing it.
Under the Biden Obama administration, veterans were dying while waiting for an appointment.
It was horrible. Somebody should have been prosecuted for that.
They couldn't even fire they had
right.
promoted and moved the
Took an act of Congress. It took an act of Congress to fire some of the people responsible for that.
And the president again. And some of these moves that we're talking about, the president and the Veterans Administration, were nonpartisan before the last year and a half, where they reformed it so you can hold and fire an administrator for malfeasance and hold them accountable in a veterans hospital when things like were happening mainly in Phoenix and Tucson that just were criminal.
Well, do you remember what they did? They kept 2 sets of books.
Yeah.
I mean, the mafia could learn lessons from the Veterans Administration. They kept 1 set of books of the real appointments and the other one showing that they were complying with the law, and this one was a fake book.
Well, that's one of the reasons that people say that conservatives are anti-government. I think we're anti-bureaucracy.
Exactly.
Whether the bureaucracy is Google, Facebook, General Motors, or the federal or state governments. I have a theory that any time a bureaucracy gets to have more than 20 people, it's not responsible to their constituencies.
Well, this brings up a major goal of mine. Now, I know this is a lofty goal, but I actually believe that if we don't achieve it, we're going to lose our country. As I mentioned earlier, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is a socialist.
Yeah.
Proud
socialist.
A proud socialist. We know that Bernie Sanders was a socialist. Kamala Harris is the only senator that had a voting record to the left of Bernie Sanders. She will be our de facto president. Biden will not. Okay, he's not capable. Even the left admits that. Oh. So what they want to do, like I said, they want to take over the judicial branch. They want to take over the executive branch and run this out of the United States Congress. Well, I believe the only thing that's going to save America is the 9th and 10th Amendments. Oh. We have got to return power, authority, and money to this, and independence to the states and to the people. I have the Pacific Legal Foundation on my show every Thursday, and I always ask them, and we have other public interest law firms on as well, how come I've never heard of the 9th and 10th Amendment going to the Supreme Court? Why are they seemingly the forgotten amendments? And they're very important, and you know this. The Constitution tells the government what it can do. The original Bill of Rights told the federal government what it can't do. And the Founding Fathers said, and if we forgot anything, here's the backstop, the 9th and 10th Amendment. Their powers reserved to the states
and the people thereof.
And the people thereof. And I believe that the only way we can save this country is dispersing the power. Because they're going to try to take over the entire country.
We know the Supreme Court is going to have a stronger conservative, but not really conservative, constitutionalist and textual judges. My only hope for Judge Roberts is in his terrible Obama decision on health care, where he said it's a tax and therefore you can do it. Part of that decision, he spoke about the 10th Amendment and the power of the states. And my only hope is that he is a constitutionalist regarding the 10th Amendment.
Well, like I said, it's our only hope. And for instance, I can tell you the other thing going on is, for instance, Salute Carbajal and the Dems promised to undo the Trump tax cut. The Trump tax cut created the biggest economic boom in this country in more than a half century.
You mean that tax cut for the rich that gave every family more money for their children, for their
created the lowest
$2,500 to every family.
Right, the lowest unemployment for blacks and Latinos and women in, again, a half century or more, probably more for blacks and Latinos. So he wants to undo that. Salute Carbajal's on the record. So our federal taxes are going to go through the roof, but he's also on the record supporting Prop 15, which is the largest tax increase in California history. So, folks, we will end up with getting two of the largest tax increases, two in the state of California, make us completely uncompetitive. Plus, the real estate in Santa Barbara. You're in real estate. Can you imagine if somebody's had a building, a commercial retail or industrial building in Santa Barbara since the 60s or 70s because it's a family business? They're going to lose it.
Yeah,
with this Prop 15 passes.
My neighbor is James DiLoretto, and he's the grandson or son of the people who built DiLoretto Plaza.
Right.
And he has no on 15 sign, and I was talking to him the other day. He says, people don't realize the tax increase on us, because they've had it in the family for years, will go to my tenants.
Triple that.
And then will go to the consumers.
Right.
And many of them are poor people. It's like our gasoline tax that's 80 cents more than any other state. Who drives the most? Not the rich.
Right.
It's the working man.
That can't
and the
live
working
where they
woman.
Work. They can't afford to live where they work. And this again, they think they actually have the audacity and the delusion to believe they can tax America into prosperity because they, the all-knowing ones, will redistribute that money equitably. And you can't, it's the equivalent of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. You can't do it.
Well, we talk, and the president and some of our conservative leaders have pointed out that we're taxing the people dramatically right now with a $4 trillion deficit to fight COVID.
It's horrid.
And what people don't understand, there's only one way to come out of a $30 trillion debt, and that's inflation. That's what a great Democrat president one term did to us named Jimmy Carter, and that's where all of a sudden inflation was 10, 12%. Well, that's how you pay bills like $30 trillion in deficit, by making our money worth less. And again, who's that a tax on? The average person.
The way I explain this is it's as if you as a household maxed out every single credit card you have to the point that you now owe more than you make in a year. And you could still only afford the minimum payments, which means you're never paying it off. That's where we're at as a country right now. We owe more than we make.
Yeah, if we went to the norm of the last 20 years of about 6% cost of borrowing by the government, all of a sudden I think we'd be over $1 trillion a year to pay the national debt interest.
Pretty soon, interest payments will be the highest cost of operating the federal government. It'll be more than defense, Social Security, and everything else. Interest on debt.
I'm going to give you a couple of anecdotal examples that will warm your heart, and that is running into guys in their and women in their 30s saying, well, there won't be any Social Security when I get there.
There may not be any for me.
They're beginning to get. And the other was I went out on a walk on Goleta Pier 2 weeks ago Sunday, and I'd never been to the end of it. And it was just a great experience. I have a bad leg and I need to walk. And so there were 3 college kids. And as I went by, I always have my mask and I say, damn government. And these college kids didn't have theirs on, and they were fishing. And one of them stopped me. He said, "Did you see what the WHO said about the lockdown?"
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, and he about masks. After the WHO had just come out against masks, and he said and he was able to quote it to me. Well, I went on out, came back, and said something about the government again, and I said, the WHO just pointed out that what we're doing with lockdowns is killing more people than the virus. And they said, yeah, I just saw that today too. And as I'm walking away, one of the college kids pointed, the sun down, the sun was down, the ocean was dark, and one of the kids pointed, he said, "You see the red wave?" So, there's an underground.
Some of them are waking up.
Oh, yeah, there's an underground movement, of people are saying, I've had enough, and this ain't working. And it certainly isn't working for us, us being the non-elite.
One other thing I wanted to bring up that people aren't aware of, this has not been introduced in Congress yet, but it's already been endorsed by the squad. It's called the Breathe Act.
The what?
Breathe. Breathe with an E on the end. The Breathe Act, not breath. But anyway, the Breathe Act, 2020. Defund the police. Get rid of prisons, jails, detention centers, ICE, and the DEA. Decriminalize anything having to do with crossing the border. Pay reparations to the people that were in prison, plus a whole litany of other things. Folks can look it up if they just Google the Breathe Act 2020. Well, the squad's already endorsed it. Tlaib and Presley are listed as the champions of the Breathe Act. This is the future. It's called decarceration.
Well,
and this is dangerous. California's already done that. This was the proposition. This year, Proposition 20 is getting rid of former Proposition 47 and 57, which was a decarceration movement here in California.
Yeah, the one big turnaround in criminality in the last 40 years in my lifetime as a politician was 3 strikes and you're out. And that just dramatically dropped criminality.
They're career criminals.
And that was a different kind of carceration than the Bidens and the Clintons did with black people with very minor drug offenses.
Right.
So black and poor whites, where they locked them up for having a small amount.
Marijuana for life kind of thing.
And so the prison reform is important, but what they're asking now...
Abolish prisons.
Yeah. And abolish the police. They're running contrary to what 80% of the voting Hispanics and the black population
They want
wants.
more cops because they're not feel safe in their own neighborhoods.
Right.
And see, Salud Carbajal in debate will go, well, I don't support defunding the police. But there were bills in Congress that none of the Democrats were willing to support along those lines, condemning the violence, defunding the police, and all that. And the bottom line, he wasn't out there in front saying, I condemn this movement.
No, he isn't condemning the violence against conservatives in his own community, where people get right in the face of mainly women and elderly women and vulgarly yell at them for saying they are for Trump, or where they key cars, or where they steal. You don't see Biden signs being stolen. Trump signs and Caldwell signs. I've put up 2 that have gone away from the same place, and it's a tragedy the way much of the media. Now, luckily, we have a very fine newspaper, but and who have really stood up, and people should remember how they've stood up.
Yes.
And the tragedy is the false media and the ignoring reality.
Well, you look at Biden's laptop. Even the Drudge Report is not covering Biden's laptop, and Biden's laptop has been corroborated as being his. And what you see there is him pay to play. Daddy and Hunter pay to play. Hunter gets the money, kickback goes to Daddy with China and Russia. Yeah,
funny, you won't laugh at this, but I did get one of my friends to laugh at it. They'd say, in it says, and 10% of a deal that's really several $1 million for the big guy.
Right.
And everybody's saying, oh, that's going to Biden. And I'm saying, no, he isn't the big guy. Maybe it's going to Obama. He was the big guy.
So it's going somewhere. I think it's going to Papa.
Yeah.
Because his other family members were involved with this. Joe has a brother that was involved in all of this as well. And this is actually typical. Mitt Romney had a kid over doing business in the Ukraine. It's typical. This is how some of these politicians are enriching their family members by getting them lucrative jobs for access to themselves. It's a swamp.
Yeah.
President Trump called it right. It's a swamp.
In these last few days, what can we do for you?
Well, I just need people to vote. You know, they can go on my website, andycaldwell2020.com, and see our great videos and messages there. But just get out and vote. The Republicans have done a great disservice by telling people don't vote by mail, don't vote by mail, when we're all voting by mail, unless you have the ability to walk it in. You can vote by mail and track your ballot to make sure it got there. There's a track your ballot app that's easy to find. I have one on my website, andycaldwell2020.com. But please vote. I'm going to represent the whole district, and I'm working for the district, not a party. I want to do something, and again, I don't know what Salut's accomplished for us. I can't think of one single thing.
No, I can't either. Andy, good luck.
Thank you.
I agree with you, as everybody knows, and that probably has cost you some votes. And we used to tease young Republicans, to candidates, I'll endorse you, or I'll endorse the other guy if it helps you.
Exactly. Jim, thank you for all that
Thank
you do.
you.
I
God
appreciate
bless
you having
you.
me on the show.
Thank you.